By the early 2000s, the Asylum has established itself as both a movie production and distribution studio. It's nowhere near the household name it would later become, but it exists, distributing about a dozen movies a month, as well as producing one or two of its own in-house content a year. David Michael Latt has established himself as a director and producer, with Kim Little as a frequent actor and collaborator in most of his movies. It seems like a stable business to be in, and anyone could be forgiven for wanting to just continue working in this field. Stay in their comfort zone, get paid, and not try to reach for the stars. But Latt and Little had other plans. Around 1997, the time the Asylum was founded, David began working with an idea he came up with after becoming frustrated with the many meaningless independent movies he saw at film festivals. What if there was a girl obsessed with these trashy movies and shows, to the point her entire movie was these trashy movies and shows? He and Kim would develop the concept over the next few years, and, with the profits from selling Max 9 Ultra Spy to Paramount, and during a lull between working on The Source and Killers 2, finally found the time and money to produce their dream project. And it wouldn't be another no-budget movie like he was so used to making and distributing. No. He's taking this baby theatrical! It would be the biggest movie he or any of his friends and coworkers had worked on to this point, and their ticket to mainstream success and credibility. That movie, Jane White, is Sick and Twisted. Unfortunately, I couldn't find information on the production budget, but it's obvious they wanted this movie to be big. Sifting through the zombie of its website, Resurrected by the Wayback Machine, you can find detailed cast and crew biographies, fan pages, contests, reviews, awards, past and upcoming screenings for the movie, and a store that sells everything from hats to shirts to posters to its soundtrack to autographed copies of the screenplay to even a collector's edition of the DVD, personally autographed by David Michael Latt and Kim Little. We also get Latt's director's journal, detailing their journey to production, making the movie, and post-production, hence how I was able to give a backstory for this movie. This was a big deal, one they took very seriously and pulled out all the stops for, and a production that would show that they're not just an independent movie studio and distributor, they're an independent movie studio and distributor with money and star power. So how did this movie end up as forgotten as the Ferris Bueller TV show? Let's flip over to the movie itself and see what's on. Jane White, played by Kim Little, is a naive, childlike young adult, raised by her agoraphobic single mother who forbids any social interaction with any other human being. Jane's only contact with the rest of the world is through her TV, which she watches religiously almost 24/7, her entire life and personality shaped through the countless programs she sits through. But the show she places first and foremost on her altar is the talk show Jerry, where the eponymous host features weird, trashy people on a show every week. You'd be forgiven if that sounds like another Jerry, but that's not important. Her obsession with the show reaches the point that she becomes convinced that Jerry is her father, and he's waiting for her to meet him in Chicago. After trying and failing to meet his guest criteria week after week, she finally decides to set off on her own and meet him as herself. Along the way, she meets Dick, get it, Dick and Jane, haha, it works, who volunteers to take her to Chicago to meet her supposed father. However, Dick isn't exactly what Jane imagined him to be, and Jane might be more of a handful than Dick is prepared for. Will their cliched love make it all the way to Chicago, where Jane will be reunited with her famous father? Does this flick contain more movie and TV references than the Roger Rabbit and Wreck-It Ralph films combined? Right off the bat, I have to give this movie huge props for its creativity, because it's a really creative idea. The story of a nearly adult woman whose only knowledge of the world around her comes from her TV, trying to get outside and survive in the real world. And not in a blast from the past, or Enchanted, or Elf, or mindset of your typical YouTube personality way. She's not somebody who's been raised in one environment now having to clash with the real world because, to her, there is no real world. Jane spent most of her life watching TV, so through her eyes, life is a TV show, and it plays out as one. When her mother first enters her room, there's applause, like an old sitcom audience welcoming a guest star. When her mother is supposedly giving important advice, it boils down to one-liners while a laugh track plays. When she sees who will end up being her love interest, sappy romantic music swells as the camera switches to wide-angle close-ups of their faces. Most of the profanity in this movie is bleeped out, like an unrehearsed live show, including one funny scene where this guy swears so many times, the censor just starts bleeping out everything he says, but ends up missing his final and probably most offensive word. Which I'm not gonna play here, since I don't like profanity on my f***ing piece of shit channel. It's a very unique, very surreal style, where we don't know if this is actually how this world works, or if it's just how a sitcom talk show obsessed teenager sees everything. And it's not a common setting for a movie. Oh sure, we've had movies that have almost fully or at least partially taken place in someone's mind, or where we see events happening through the mind's eye of the protagonist. But in an entire movie where we're never given an answer as to what's real and what's being shown through the eyes of an unstable, unreliable narrator is much harder to find. The only other movie I can think of that even comes close is Scott Pilgrim, another heavily stylized movie that supposedly takes place in the real world, but where such insane, over-the-top shit occurs in our hero's life, you're left wondering what actually happened. And never told. That's what this movie is. An unstable blend of fantasy and reality where you can never tell which is which. Kind of what I wished Killers 2 was. To emphasize how Jane's world is a product of a television-centered mind, everything looks horribly fake, even for a low-budget comedy. It's obvious nearly everything is a set, and not even movie set quality. These are sets you'd see in a high school play, quickly erected, given a splash of paint, and decorated with whatever they found at the Goodwill. They look like if the designers of Pee-wee's Playhouse made a serious attempt to go into interior decorating. They kind of look real, but are built in such a way that they legitimately look like sets from an 80s, 90s NBC sitcom. And nothing's dirty. Every floor is spotless, every shelf has been wiped down. Even when she's wandering through the back alleys of the red light district, there's not a single used condom, overflowing dumpster, or bum at a trash fire. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these aren't sets, they're actual places. But if so, congratulations to the location scout for finding the seediest, cheapest, most clashing, yet unrealistically tidy filming locations they could have used to shoot a movie. The same can't be said about the driving, which, in sitcom fashion, is clearly shot in a still car with green screen. And this is obviously intentional, since even the cheapest Asylum movies so far have featured live driving sequences. It's even funnier when you watch the background during these scenes, as not only do they not follow the directions the characters give, but you can see the obvious stock footage change mid-scene. It happened in the shows they were trying to parody, so it's just what's happening here. Heck, with Jane's state of mind, she might just be sitting in a junkyard car, talking to a dead cat she's confused for an S&M gimp. The parts of this movie that actually look real occur when the movie, well, gets real. When Jane's trying to buy a bus ticket to see Jerry, it's obviously set in an actual bus station, showing how serious she is and wanting to go to Chicago. After Jane has a fight with Dick, the movie transitions from an obviously fake desert on a soundstage to a real desert, suggesting Jane has been temporarily knocked out of her fantasy land. Either that, or she's imagining a more dramatic genre to match her mood. It's this subtlety that leaves it ambiguous how much of this world belongs to Jane, and how much is what passes for reality. Jane herself kept me guessing, as at times she seems to wield godlike control over this world. Besides directly controlling things with her remote that she always keeps on her person, she'll bring things up that she likes that manifest later, right out of the blue. At one point, she and Dick are talking about how they think Screech from Saved by the Bell is hot, and it's revealed Dick has Screech-like hair. While falling head over heels with Dick, she tells him how much she'd like a Rankin Bass Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer themed adventure. Couple scenes later, we suddenly get a stop-motion music video featuring Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. If this isn't all her fantasy world, then she holds powers the kid from the Twilight Zone would envy. And with her mindset, she's just as immature and dangerous. Even the movie's transitions depend on her mood. When she's bored or upset, we'll get fades and wipes like they use for long journeys and waits in movies. Usually accompanied by low-key alternative rock songs because that's what usually accompanies these scenes. And when she's happy and hyper, they'll get very creative, mimicking transition effects and cards from other shows. Batman, Third Rock from the Sun, Saturday Night Live, Monty Python, and a bunch I can't recognize, but I'm sure someone will point out what they are. These are probably all scenes she's imagining would happen during periods of nothingness. In her world, there's no dead air, so she tunes out everything that doesn't match her perfect film world until she gets to the next scene. A skill I'm sure we'd all love to learn. Speaking of music, Jane even has her own theme song, in both Saccharine Kitty Show and Punk Girl Rock variations. And whatever version you listen to, it's not a tune that will be leaving your head anytime soon.
It's the Jane White Show. It's the Jane White Show. She's the girl you really ought to get to know. It's the Jane White Show. She's the girl you really ought to get to know.
At this point, I guess we should talk about Jane herself. And as you'd expect, she's quite the character. I've already spoken about how greatly I respect Kim Little's acting ability, but even I was a little hesitant hearing that she'd be playing a childlike teenager in this movie. But no, I had nothing to worry about. She's as fantastic as always. As you can infer from how she's been raised by the TV with little to no other social contact, Jane is a young kid stuck in a young adult's body. She's hyper, she's naive, she suffers from mood swings, and she has absolutely no people skills. Her world is one of laugh tracks, weird people, and cliches. The one thing she knows how to do is copy what she's seen on TV. So her actions are based on how she's seen them played out in her shows. She gets on a moped with a weird guy because she assumes that a weird guy on a moped will take her to the bus stop. That's just how it works in the shows she's seen. At the bus station, she can't get a ticket because she has no idea how to buy a ticket. They always skip over the bus ride. And the reason she falls in love with Dick? Because she confuses him with an escaped serial killer she's been exchanging love letters with while he was in prison. Why was she writing letters to a serial killer? Because she hoped it would get her on the Jerry Show! Her letters aren't even comprised of words because all they show on TV is a character just typing away. Heck, when a major catastrophe in her life happens, she trashes a hotel room and attempts to hang herself. Because that's just what TV taught her is the logical thing to do. Man, maybe TV is more violent than we thought. This lady is the very embodiment of people who end up dead or maimed because they didn't have the sense not to copy what they saw on TV. It's so tragic, yet hilarious at the same time. We even get some backstory that explains why she thinks Jerry is her father. A scene so sad yet bizarre, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And of course, her dialogue is comprised almost entirely of either parodying things they say on TV or comparing her situations to TV shows, all the while trying to talk through thick braces.
Did you ever have a dream? The most sensational, inspirational, celebrational dream?
This is the most greatest thing in the whole world. Better than Sweet Valley High. Better than Saved by the Bell.
That box gives me my freedom. It takes me to Green Acres and to Central Perk and plants me on a bar stool where everybody knows my name.
People who speak only in media comparisons. You'll never make a career out of that. Will Wheaton plays Jane's boyfriend Dick, and he's every cheesy line from every romance ever. Yeah, this is not a character. This is some semi-sentient being comprised entirely of emotional tirades from every primetime feel-good sitcom ever made. He's the overly supportive, somewhat quirky teenage leading male you'd see from Saved by the Bell, or Boy Meets World, or Family Matters, or a million other cheesy sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, minus any other characteristics that attempt to make them seem like real boys. The Brady Bunch might as well be Steven Universe compared to how artificial and flat this thing is. There is not a single scrap of personality to him. He is built solely from one-liners and horribly written romantic lines, to the point you might as well add an audience reaction after everything he says. Heck, I'm surprised the movie itself doesn't.
She's not dying anymore, Jane. You saved her. It's just what the doctor ordered. Ever since I first laid eyes on you in the bus station, I knew that we were meant to be together. And now that I've got you, I'm not ever going to let you go. I'm going to handcuff you to my heart and stab you repeatedly with my love.
Oh, just a head.
And surprisingly, his performance isn't as annoying as you'd think. Except for some parts where his whining devolves into the sound of a dying goose.
Ew, you thought he was me? Jane, he doesn't look anything like me. That guy weighs close to like 300 pounds. Jane, he's like 60 years old.
Shut up, Wesley.
The rest of the cast is also comprised of faces. Yeah, they're all people you know from that one thing who didn't do much after that one thing, but wow, did they do that one thing well, so much so they will forever only be associated with that one thing. We have Chris Hardwick from every stand-up talk show ever, Mickey Jones from Home Improvement and V, David L. Lander from Laverne and Shirley, Maureen McCormick from The Brady Bunch, Colin Mochrie and Brad Sherwood from Whose Line Is It Anyway, Gary Owens from Space Ghost, Michelle Phillips from The Mamas and the Papas, Allie Mills and Dana McKellar from The Wonder Years, Richard Klein from Three's Company, Deborah Wilson from Mad TV, Phil Lamar, also from Mad TV, and a bunch of really obscure cartoons, Ted Shackelford from Knots Landing, and of course, Dustin Diamond from Saved by the Bell, as well as Carly Westerman from Phil of the Future, making her screen debut here. And serving as our mandatory recurring Asylum name, we have Andrew Lohr from War of the Worlds, Legion of the Dead, King of the Lost World, and The Beast of Bray Road, who co-stars with his fellow co-star from Caroline in the City, Eric Lutz. Somewhere in this movie, we also have Tom Tangen, an actor who's appeared in everything from Purple Rain to Monkey Bone, Donnie Darko, Three Amigos, Back to the Future, and Nightmare on Elm Street 2, who's also produced his own documentaries and low-budget schlock films, and who has an extensive resume as a TV transcriber. I don't know where you are here, Tom, but keep up the good work. Oh, and documentary producer Jenna Edwards, who would show up in a much later Asylum movie, is somewhere in the audience. Whew, I think I got everyone. It's pointless to go over their characters because they're here for the exact reason you think they're here. Allie Mills plays the mother, Gary Owens plays a TV announcer, Dustin Diamond plays a hyper weirdo, Colin Mochrie and Brad Sherwood likely ad-libbed their lines, Phil Lamar and Deborah Wilson play random sketch comedy characters, David Landers plays a nervous, somewhat perverted guy who never looks like he wants to be there, and so on. They're not exactly playing anything out of their wheelhouse, is what I'm saying. But that's the point, as everyone in this movie is likely just a figment of Jane's TV-obsessed imagination. Oh, she probably has a mom, probably met a boy, probably ran into a bunch of weird people, and probably watches the news. But the people she sees, the world she hears, and the eccentric personalities they display are all probably in her head. Like everything else, they're likely people and characters she's seen on TV, artificially placed in by a mind that refused to accept anything not from the small screen. In reality, these are probably really ugly people and really ugly situations, but her underdeveloped mind can't handle them, so instead she sees her fantasy world, built out of TV land. This is a brain that makes A Beautiful Mind's leads look as stable as Switzerland's economy. The character most likely to actually look like how he's seen through Jane's eyes is Jerry, since why would Jane want to mask over who she thinks is her father? And yet David Landers hosting a Jerry Springer-esque trash talk show is one of the most unbelievable scenarios this movie presents. Alright, to be real for a second, I do love the cast for this movie. Heck, I love how practically everything looks in this movie. This is likely the best cast, best produced, best shot movie in the Asylum's library. And unlike other times I've given the same praise to movies tied to the studio, we actually have an Asylum-produced movie I can heap that praise upon. Nobody sleeps with their performances, everybody is clearly having fun, the sets look great, the lighting's professional, the sound editing and ADR work is glitch-free, and it's nice to see a visual effects budget. Especially one that incorporates CGI, stop-motion, hand-drawn animation, and design homages to dozens of different shows and movies. It's like the music video for UHF, but for sitcoms instead of MTV. And the camera work? Well, it's David Michael Latt directing, of course it looks good. He knows how to get up close for more emotional shots, pull back for intentionally slow shots, use a wide angle for more environmental shots, and keep the weird and uncomfortable angles for weird and uncomfortable scenes. Like Jane waiting aimlessly for hours at the bus station, or throwing a fit after hearing news about Jerry. And, like everything else in this movie, a lot of techniques pay tribute to more well-known films. I don't recognize any famous shots, but according to the behind-the-scenes featurette, they exist, so I'm probably just an uncultured Philistine. It's a movie I can call a movie. So different from most of the Asylum's work, it's hard to believe it's from the same people. It just goes to show, give the right people a budget, they'll create a whole new world for you to explore. And most importantly, this movie taught me I was pronouncing David Wimmelwei's name wrong all this time.
My name's David Ramawi. I mean Barney. Call me Barney.
So this movie sounds incredible. An original screwball comedy incorporating Lynchian themes where the lines between fantasy and reality are non-existent. It's professionally made and well acted, with creative effects serving as both a tribute and a satire of TV shows and the culture surrounding them. Whether you're the mainstream, a niche audience, or the highbrow art film crowd, it sounds like a movie anyone can watch and get some entertainment out of. A true masterpiece from people on their way to greatness. So why isn't this movie remembered with fondness and eventually fell by the wayside once they milked the hype for all it was worth? Well, it's time to bring this train to a sudden crash because for everything this movie gets right, it commits the #1 cardinal sin in comedy. It is boring. And not just boring, deathly boring. One of those movies where you're checking your watch expecting 10 minutes to have gone by, only to find it's only been 20 seconds. This movie's pacing is wretched. We're stuck in scenes and locations for far longer than we need to be. And just when you think a conversation is winding down, it's only just beginning. Look, I don't have a problem with slower paced films. I've gotten through 3+ hour long films just fine, and I stomached that foreplay movie from the beginning of this retrospective without complaint. Something doesn't have to be moving or exploding every few seconds to keep my attention, though it does help. Even slower comedies can still be funny if they know how to make the humor match the tone. But it doesn't matter if your movie's 3 hours long or just 3 minutes long, it needs to keep its audience's engagement. There has to be a sense that something's happening or that there's a build-up to something, which I very rarely got from this movie. I mentioned that Jane speaks only in show quotes and comparisons, and Dick and cheesy, overly dramatic speeches, and that comprises most of this movie's dialogue, which, at first, is funny. But then you pass the 30-minute mark, and they're still speaking entirely in quotes and one-liners, and the novelty kind of wears off. I'm a fan of MST3K, where the dialogue is 90% near unrecognizable movie jokes, but even when their jokes are falling flat, you still get a ridiculous movie to watch, and they take time off between sittings to develop character and tell some jokes unrelated to the film. This movie is the equivalent of watching MST3K without the movie or breaks, just the guy and the puppets in front of a pure white screen, making jokes you have no context for. At first, the absurdity of the situation is funny, but at some point, you kind of want it to come to a point. And by the hour mark, you're ready to shove the puppets into both the actors' holes just to get them to shut up. It's only 80 minutes, and yet this movie felt like it would never end. The overall comedy in this movie is weird. Not necessarily bad, but often a way I don't remember experiencing before. With most bad comedies, I'm constantly asking myself, why do they think this is funny? Well, while watching this movie, the question running through my mind was, why don't I think this is funny? As I just spent a good chunk of this movie explaining, the setup is hilarious. It has ridiculous characters, cheesy sets, weird camera effects, and eccentric performances from name actors that make the performances from the Oogie Loves look subdued by comparison. We have Kim Little playing an adult with severely stunted mental growth who lives in a world that changes based on how she feels and what show best represents that tone. That's funny. We have Colin Mockery as an S&M junkie, who, after a botched session with Jane, realizes he loves his wife and wants to patch things up with her. That's funny. We have Will Wheaton, who, after Jane breaks up with him because he's not a serial killer, goes out and murders people just to impress her. That's funny. Everything in this movie has the makings of a good comedy. So why am I not laughing? Well, I thought about it, and I realized that while the movie has the potential to be funny, it doesn't fully develop the jokes to make it funny. Take this gag where Jane uses her remote to turn off someone's car horn. That's funny, and lends more shade as to where the real world ends and Jane's world begins. I was looking forward to seeing what else the remote would be used for. Like maybe she hits the mute button when someone's screaming at her. Or maybe someone brings up something she missed and she rewinds her life to check the scene again. Or maybe they're in a dark cave and she adjusts the brightness setting so that they can see. There's a lot of potential for a good running gag. Instead, she uses it one other time for a gag I don't even get, then we don't even see it again until the end. Why? You had a great setup, but then you never take advantage of it and then you suddenly treat it like it's the most important thing in the movie at the end. It didn't even have time to reach MacGuffin status, it was brought out so rarely. The Adam Sandler Click movie had a better execution than this. And that's a movie where execution is the better alternative. Or take Jane's obsession with getting on the Jerry Show. The beginning of the movie shows how willing she is to match Jerry's guest criteria, despite having no idea what she's getting into. Again, that's funny, and lends itself to development. What if the first 5-10 minutes was a montage of Jane attempting to meet the random requirements, each time getting into trouble until she gives up and decides to see Jerry in person? Or what if that was what the whole movie was based around? Every 10-20 minutes, she sees a new opening for guests and devotes herself to meeting his requirements, taking her boyfriend along for the ride. Either way, good amount of potential, and it would have kept the audience guessing. Instead, we just get the opening criteria gag. Then, halfway through the movie, we get another set of criteria that she tries to match. And in keeping with how this movie doesn't know when to stop, both times the gag lasts for almost 20 minutes, long past the point we've stopped thinking the situation is funny. The comedy in this movie just feels stuck in neutral. They know what's funny, they know how to make it look funny, but then they don't do anything with it. They start to tell a joke, then just abandon it and move on to the next joke, even when they're in the middle of telling the first joke. The only consistent thing in this movie is, again, all the TV show references, which are just spit-fired at the audience without context or a change of pace. I mean, it's not as bad as a Seltzerberg comedy, but... Actually, no, I take that back. Seltzerberg comedies know how to frame a joke better than this movie, because they'll actually do something with their gags. Even they recognize how a situation can be exaggerated and taken to the point of absurdity, and their gags actually affect the world they've created. And even if you haven't seen the movies they're satirizing, you can get an idea of what the movie's about and what the joke is. Sure, 90% of the jokes end in a long groan, but it's something other than saying Twin Peaks exists, Simpsons exists, Third Rock from the Sun exists, and not doing anything with them. And even they had a better remote gag than this movie has. Now that said, this movie's not nearly as painful to sit through as a Seltzerberg comedy. Despite the incessant, inane dialogue, I found myself amused with some of the funnier scenes, and I can't think of any jokes that misfired so badly they've scarred me for life. But that's the thing. The comedy's amusing at best. All this setup, all these characters, and all this work put into such a ridiculous, surreal world, and all I could muster for the majority of the runtime was a smirk every 10 minutes or so. The only two scenes that got a legitimate laugh out of me were, again, Jane's remote turning off the car horn, and Dustin Diamond's character confusing Jane White for, well, Kim Little. I don't know, just the fact that Kim Little exists in this world struck a chord with me, and made me question if Jane even knows who she herself is. Is her identity as much of a construction as the rest of her world? But yeah, 80 minutes, all this insanity involved, and only 2 fleeting gags made me chuckle. I guess that's more than some other comedies have gotten from me, but such a creative movie with such joke potential, it takes advantage of almost none of it. For a movie meant to set itself apart from the rest of the Asylum's catalog, maybe it should have been funnier than the comedies made with 1/10 of the budget. And that brings us to the final biggest flaw of the movie, it just doesn't have that much of an identity. David Michael Latt said that the movie was a satire of the pointless, sick and offensive indie movies he's seen. But the problem with satire is that, unless you have something that sets your production apart, you can very easily become the thing you're satirizing, which this movie definitely falls victim to. As I've established, it has a very creative world with very eccentric characters and a very interesting idea to work off of. And it doesn't. It's Disney Pixar's Onward. While the world is amazing, nothing the movie does justifies being set in this world. The characters, while weird, are still human beings with human problems. The references are all to real shows you can watch. The rare instance where something goofy happens, it's usually a dream sequence or a transition that doesn't affect this world. There's no media, no characters that are unique to this world, and because the joke is that they're all constructions mixed from other TV characters, they're not given a chance to develop unique personalities. There's not even anything quotable or stand out that happens in this movie that I haven't seen in a million other low-budget flicks. You could transplant these characters and situations into most other films and not notice a difference. Compare this to... well, the closest movie I think you could compare this to, Weird Al's UHF. That's also a movie featuring a media-obsessed lead and a cast of eccentric character actors. That also pokes fun at low-budget comedies, while being a low-budget comedy, and has a million references to other movies and shows. But the difference is while so much of the plot is intentionally stock and dedicated to parodies of bigger movies, they set aside time to develop their own characters and sequences. I remember George Newman. I remember Stanley Spadowski. I remember the weird-ass shows and commercials the studio produced. I remember the fight between a karate class and gangsters. And I remember the weird scenes that also left me questioning what's real and what's in Newman's head. There are a million parodies out there, but there's only one UHF. Plus, as any internet critic of the last 15 years can tell you, this movie is immensely quotable. What does Jane White have that sets it apart?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
It's so obsessed with making references to other media that it forgets to build an identity for itself. It's like a YouTube personality seeing some other YouTube personality doing something popular, then trying to ape that popular thing, not realizing what made it popular in the first place. Yeah, fine, I plead guilty, but you get my point. And the sad thing is that it does have jokes that would have made it unique. Like if they did keep Jane White's remote as a running gag, or if they were more specific with their parodies and it changed to a different movie or show depending on Jane's mood. Or even if the barriers between Jane's world and the real world were occasionally shattered. Like if at the lowest point of her life, the world suddenly changed to be much more realistic and cruel, one Jane couldn't control and she desperately wants to escape from. Or, heck, if the movie was sick and twisted, like the title promised. Yeah, when you hear that title, you expect a Tom Green or American Pie or Adam Sandler movie, a gross-out comedy meant to shock and offend. But besides a few tame scenes with the aforementioned transvestite prostitutes and S&M junkie, and this really cringe-inducing monologue Dick gives about seeing his father raped by a deer, there's really not much blue humor to be found, barely deserving an R rating. On the one hand, I'm glad this movie didn't go in that direction, but on the other hand, I would have remembered it if they did. I remember Freddy Got Fingered. Anyone unfortunate enough to see it will never forget that thing. All this movie has going for it is its stop-motion musical number, and even that's not enough to carry a full-length feature. There are a lot of unforgettable parodies out there. This is not one of them. This movie is frustrating. I want to praise it. I want to laugh at it. I want to tell David Michael Latt and Kim Little how good a job they did and that this is the best thing they've ever made. It's painfully obvious they put their heart and soul into the making of this flick, and in many aspects, it shows. But somewhere lines must have gotten crossed, or they were so obsessed with making the movie look good that they forgot to focus on the elements that matter. It's colorful, it's energetic, it's well acted and shot, it wears its higher budget on its sleeve, and it tries so hard to stand out not just among the other Asylum movies, but the world of cinema in general. But it's so boring! It has no identity, its comedy is lukewarm at best, the jokes and gags it does try to develop are stretched out well past their breaking point, and for such a creative shell of the world, there's nothing inside to support it. There is a funny original movie in here somewhere, one that might have sat on the same tier as other incredible comedies. But, as it's presented, it's a film that's a chore to sit through and leaves you wanting something with more substance. There is a notable scene here and there, but on the whole, you wouldn't miss a thing by skipping this one. Though if you do have a chance, check out the movie's site and Latt's production notes. I learned a lot of behind-the-scenes information about Latt, Kim, and the Asylum in general, making this the most interesting thing to bear this movie's name. Jane White may be sick and twisted, but she isn't entertaining. And that's probably the overall consensus others gave it as well. While it did pick up some regional awards, the movie apparently didn't do that well with critics and audiences, and it was just too little of a payout for a movie with this amount of work and money thrown at it. It officially ended the chances of anyone going mainstream, so everyone attached just went back to what they do best. So next time, we're back to the Asylum's regular churn-out with a no-budget horror movie. Oh, but not just any horror movie, their first mockbuster. Or is it? Check back next time and find out. Hey there everyone, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider supporting me on Patreon and help me create even more content like this. It's only $1 to get early access to my videos, and only $5 gets you a credit at the end of each of those videos, with higher tiers offering these and even more perks. And as you help me reach certain goals, I have super special content lined up for all of you. Head on over and check out my Patreon today, and I'll see you next time.